This week, President Trump's administration pulled support from a private industry plan that would have let big tech write its own AI rules. Now, this is big, a move that President Trump's team calls necessary to stop bureaucrats and corporations from running the show. California, meanwhile, just went in the opposite direction, passing a sweeping frontier AI law that forces developers to hand over safety data and training details to state officials. Legislation that was welcomed by Chan Park, OpenAI head of U.S. policy. Listen.
We're really pleased that the bill, as it turned out, actually creates a pathway for harmonization towards federal and state government oversight. I think one of the concerns we raised was that we thought there was a particular role for states to play and a particular role for federal governments to play. And I think seeing that both the governor as well as the bill itself reflect the fact that there's a pathway to harmonization where there can be a really important role for states to play, but more importantly for national security matters.
In July, the Senate struck down a provision that would have blocked states from passing their own AI rules for 10 years, leaving companies caught between 50 different regimes while China builds one. At the center of this battle is Mark Beall, a former Pentagon AI policy director, now advising lawmakers in the administration on how to unleash AI for national strength without letting big government or big tech take it over. He joins us now. Mark, I love having you on because you're one of the rare perspectives who is fluent in what this technology is capable of doing, and yet you're not all for big tech or big government. You're bringing in some common sense policy ideas here. What are you telling lawmakers on this front?
Hey, Chanel, nice to see you again. You know, we're seeing this incredible tug of war going on right now over the future of AI policy between Washington, D.C. and Silicon Valley and the state capitals all in the mix. And the big question is how many rules and oversight mechanisms are going to be in place and where are they going to go and what are they going to compel the companies to do? And it's really critical, obviously, because this technology can deliver incredible benefits for our country and for our citizens. And at the same time, as you point out, there needs to be rules of the road because this can get really, really dangerous as well. So when you think specifically about AI in healthcare, which is the subject of this recent report, I think it's quite fascinating because on one hand, we see the opportunities for AI delivering incredible benefits on healthcare, on medicine, on drug discovery. These are some of the most important and consequential opportunities. But at the same time, these AI systems can help psychopaths develop biological weapons. And so right now, when the sort of plan that was in place has now been thrown out, and now we got to sort of figure out, okay, who's going to be doing this oversight and how?
Yeah, that is the question of the hour of all the very important questions that we're posing about what life is going to look like with AI. That is right now the biggest question across every category. Right now with California, their new frontier AI law could either become a blueprint for nationwide restrictions, or what it looks like to me, it could be a warning of what government overreach looks like, hindering AI in fairly damaging ways. But, from a policy perspective, where do you think the Frontier Act stands?
Yeah, this piece of legislation coming out of California is actually quite a watered-down version of a similar bill that was floated last year. And when I'm listening to folks like the gentleman from OpenAI and talking to others in the companies, they seem to have a little bit of a grudging acceptance that this might actually be a good step forward. And as the OpenAI gentleman said, a pathway by which federal and state laws can be synchronized and harmonized. I think after the defeat the industry suffered in the context of that big, beautiful bill, federal preemption fight, I think this is a good compromise potentially, and I think there's ongoing conversations now to figure out how or whether the California bill might inform federal efforts in the future.
Yeah, well, at least it's U.S.-based, we hope, because we've talked about this before. If we don't come up with solutions, we're copying solutions, copy-pasting solutions that are coming out of the EU. They're they're on top of this stuff. They're trying to legislate like crazy, and they seem to be going a little overboard when it comes to how they are regulating in the effort to protect their citizens. But at the same time, if you don't strike the right balance, it could be deadly on a national scale.
Absolutely. This technology at the same time is very, very powerful already and also very, very early. And so I think the United States and the American way of regulating AI has got to have to look a little bit differently than what they're doing over in China, what they're doing over in the European Union. We tend to be way more innovation forward, and we don't necessarily think government is always the right answer for many of these issues. And we simply can't look to the Europeans, and unfortunately, they've kind of regulated themselves out of the game. Whether it was one of their old data privacy laws from 2018, or some of the new AI work that they're pushing for, that's not really fit for purpose for the United States. And so, we need a tech-friendly innovation accelerant policy, but we still need policy because, as you point out, this technology is already becoming quite powerful and quite dangerous, and we have to get our arms around it.
Well, okay, so what is a specific nice compromise in this case? So on the one hand, you have all these different systems, and innovators will potentially be a little cautious about navigating a U.S. system with so many different regimes. At the same time, looking at China, who has one regime, and they're saying, you know what, that's a much easier, faster, cleaner way to develop our systems. So is there a tangible, single kind of piece of advice you're giving to lawmakers on this front?
Yeah, I think the first thing to know is the Chinese have actually regulated AI quite heavily. And you'll be shocked to learn that the bureaucracy over in communist China isn't exactly like a well-oiled machine either. So there's some interesting regulatory discussions over there, and so I think that's something we ought to track too. But here in the homeland, I think we have to think about a couple of core issues. I mean, I think the first and the most important one for the federal government is on the national security and public safety front. The Constitution stipulates providing for the common defense is a core function of the federal government. And so as we think about these systems becoming more and more powerful and more germane to military applications and military competitiveness, and eventually if we reach these levels of superintelligence, the AI itself could become potentially dangerous. And then we need to get our arms around what that looks like. And I think the first step actually was some legislation introduced last week by Senator Hawley and Senator Blumenthal, which for the first time actually identifies artificial superintelligence, defines it in law, and proposes an evaluation framework by which government can begin to assess the potential dangers here. That's kind of one example of an idea that we strongly support, just because it doesn't really slow down innovation, but it starts to put in the right mechanisms, the right analysis, so that our policymakers are no longer going to be flying blind through this potentially very, very important AI revolution.
Definitions. It's the key to making good law. Make sure you have the right definitions in place. Mark Beall, a pleasure as always. Keep up the good work and tracking and advising. We'll visit with you soon.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Coming up, cargo theft in America is up nearly 70%, costing over $1 billion last year. This rising but hidden threat to America's economy is hitting us where it hurts, and no one's really talking about it. American Trucking Association President Chris Spears joins us next.